This is a 2020 Chevrolet Bolt EV, and it might just be the best deal out there right now on an electric car. However, stay tuned to the end of this video, and I'm going to show you a little buying hack that makes getting one of these cars an unbeatable deal. What is the Bolt? Well, it's a tall hatchback with 4 doors and room for 4 grown adults in here. There's a 5th seat too, but it's really just for emergencies. This all-electric hatchback has a 66 kilowatt-hour battery pack, which is good for a claimed 259 miles of electric range. Prices start from $37 grand, though this fully loaded Premier model with every single option is $44,000, but more on the pricing in a second. Now I know I've given you a few stats to digest, but here's one more. This little hatchback has the equivalent of 200 horsepower, and it's pretty peppy, especially around town. I mean, from 0 to say 50 miles an hour, this thing is properly quick. Now the acceleration does taper at freeway speeds, but don't worry, this thing is more than quick enough on the day-to-day commute and is very happy cruising at speeds over 80 miles an hour. Being an electric car, there's obviously no gasoline engine, so it's very, very quiet, especially at those low speeds. So quiet, in fact, that the NHTSA actually mandates that all EVs have to produce some sort of artificial noise at low speeds, just so oncoming pedestrians can actually hear them coming. Noise level in the cabin does actually pick up at speed. Once you're going over, again, 50 to 60 miles an hour, there is a pretty notable amount of wind noise in this vehicle. And that's due to the greenhouse of the Bolt. Look around, there's a ton of glass here, and the glass is quite tall, so naturally wind is going to buff it off of the windshield, for example. The Bolt isn't pitched as a sort of hot hatchback or some sort of sporty car, but it is innately kind of sporty in a very different EV sort of way. Because all the electric batteries are in the floor of the vehicle, most of the mass in this thing is way down low, which means the center of gravity is quite low. Granted, the suspension's pretty soft and roly-poly, but it does hang on in the corners pretty well. Additionally, because it is an electric vehicle, it provides instant torque as soon as you touch the gas pedal. There's no waiting for the gasoline engine, just look. It just picks up and goes, which is very fun in its own unique way. Being a fully loaded vehicle, this Bolt has a lot of goodies in here. Obviously, leather interior, heated seats, but there's one feature in here that I really like, something near and dear to my heart, and that is the heated steering wheel, which is a very uncommon sight in cars sold in the USA for whatever reason. Now, it's near and dear to my heart because as someone with a low resting heart rate, I have almost constant issue with cold hands, you know, that poor blood circulation. So the heated steering wheel to me is an absolute godsend. The Bolt also has features like lane keep assist, automatic collision braking, front collision warning, rear cross traffic alert, and interestingly, one of my favorite features in new GM products is the HD backup camera. Yes, the backup camera on this car is full high def, and it's not just the fact that it's high def, it's how many different viewpoints it has. Not only does it have the ultra wide view backup camera, it has a bird's eye view camera and cameras pointing at all 4 wheels. So it's basically impossible to hit a curb with this thing or bump into your neighbor. It's really actually very handy for backing out of tight parking spaces. Now, the elephant in the room with any electric vehicle is obviously going to be charging it. So there are, to fill you in quickly, there are different kinds of chargers. So your typical wall plug at your house, 110 volt outlet, is considered a level 1 charger. Most of the charging stations you'll find around your town are considered level 2 fast chargers. There is also an available option on this car, which is the DC fast charge, which is like an insanely quick charger way of getting up to 100 miles of range in about 30 minutes, which is very handy in a pinch. However, where are you going to find these chargers? That's really the big question. So for my home, I don't have a level 2 fast charger. I just have a regular 110 volt outlet. And to be honest, if that's all you got and you really want an EV, you're going to have to consider upgrading to a level 2 charger at least, because this is not exclusive to the Bolt. This is going to apply to any EV. With a level 1 standard wall plug charger, I got this car down to about 10% charge, so about 25 miles remaining. I plugged it in. It said it was going to take 76 hours to recharge with the slow charger. Now, for comparison's sake, a level 2 charger would do the same deed in about 9 to 10 hours, depending on how quickly it is. Fortunately, because EVs are becoming increasingly common, there are tons of certified installers out there to convert your home or your garage to a level 2 quick charger. What they do is convert the outlet to accept 240 volts and then obviously give you the fast charger unit itself. Now, depending on your area, you're going to see quotes to do this out the door anywhere from about $1,500 to $5,000, which is a huge range, so it does pay to call around. Like all EVs, we talk about brake regen, which is basically when you lift off the accelerator or start touching the brakes, the EV batteries try to scavenge that kinetic energy and shove it right back into them to recharge them just a little bit. Now, most EVs have a pretty aggressive amount of regen. So when you lift off the gas, the car slows down pretty aggressively. However, with certain EVs, they have different driving modes, which can enable one-pedal driving. Now, one-pedal driving is exactly what it sounds like, where the brake regen becomes so aggressive, all you have to do is use the accelerator. The brake kind of becomes redundant. Now, the Bolt doesn't have a specific one-pedal driving mode as such, but it does have the trigger. This left trigger behind the steering wheel right here, it's almost like a shift paddle for an automatic transmission. If you pull the trigger, it slows the car down. And it will actually slow it down to a complete stop if you hold it long enough. This is one of those little things about EVs where if you're mindful and you use the trigger enough, you can actually learn to drive the car without actually using the, see, it's really aggressive. You can learn to use the car without using the brake pedal at all. And that will actually improve your electric range, which is pretty cool. The Chevrolet Bolt features a 66 kilowatt-hour battery pack, which is good for a claimed 259 miles of all-electric range. However, how accurate is that really? After all, every now and again you hear these claims about car manufacturers saying the cars can go distance XYZ, but when people test them, it turns out they can only go this far. Sometimes they do better, sometimes they do worse. And of course, some of that is down to the driver and how you're driving the car, but now I can give you some handy stats on the Bolt. So this car, like I said, has a 66-hour battery pack, and interestingly, it has a little trip computer here on the infotainment that when you reset it, not only shows the distance traveled, but obviously instead of showing your MPG, it shows energy used in kilowatt hours. And I've now driven this car around with 66 kilowatt hours of juice, and well, 65.9 to be specific, and I've gone 245.7 miles, which is actually pretty close to the claimed 259 mile figure offered by GM. The Bolt has a lot of very useful information to give the driver as far as electric battery is concerned. Take, for example, the charge gauge. Now, it's just like a fuel gauge where it has, you know, half, 3/4, quarter, empty, whatever. But with that comes numbers. So the middle number is the range you're expected to get as you're driving right now. It also gives you a high number if you drive very conservatively and a low number if you drive like your pants are on fire, which is useful to know. The Bolt also has a lot of useful information on the infotainment screen as far as the batteries are concerned. Take, for example, the flow chart, which actually shows you how much juice is left in the batteries and how the car is distributing power lifetime while you're driving. It's pretty cool to watch. One of the Bolt's handy hacks it has for reducing the cost of ownership is the charging screen on the infotainment system. Now, of course, it has a few buttons. The first is immediate. If you hit the immediate button and you plug your car in, it's just going to start charging. However, if you have access to a fast charger, say at your home, where it only takes a few hours to charge this thing all the way up, what you can do is hit the departure setting, which is configurable. That tells the Bolt when you plan on leaving your house, and that way, if you plug it in, it will actually wait to begin charging until non-peak hours on the electrical grid and lowers your electrical bill, which is pretty clever. Now, I want to go back to the interior of the Bolt for a second. I know I mentioned on it before, but there is truly room for 4 grown adults in here, which is very nice. I find the seats to be quite comfortable. And crucially, on this car, this has the optional Bose stereo. It's very, very good. But there's one other thing I want to point out, and that's the interior trimming on this car. Now, a lot of it is unfortunately kind of just cheap plastic. So right behind the camera, the dash, cheap plastic. There's a lot of that all over the place, very typical GM in that regard. But it is clear they put some effort in other areas. Like this trim piece on the lower part of the dash has this like really cool 3D printed effect that actually kind of glistens in the sunlight. That's pretty neat. The EV space right now is a bit unique because the segments are a bit less defined. Right now, now at this point is basically, do you want a small EV, do you want a bigger EV, or do you need a SUV? That's pretty much how it breaks down. And so in this sort of smaller EV class, the biggest names you're going to be seeing obviously are the Tesla Model 3, the Bolt, the Nissan Leaf, and the Kia Niro. So let's break down the competition just so you understand how to cross-shop effectively. Now let's start with the Tesla Model 3 because that's obviously the biggest competitor here as far as I see it. Now for $39,990, your base no option Model 3, which is what competes against this car, you're getting the standard single motor model with 250 miles of range. It's going to be rear-wheel drive only, not all-wheel drive. And it won't have any of the key options that a lot of people tend to fanboy over Tesla about. Now, not to knock the standard Model 3, because it actually is a pretty well-equipped vehicle. It does have the basic Autopilot. It has a leather interior, things like that. But it won't have the crazy acceleration of the high-performance model. It won't have the crazy range you often hear quoted from the dual-motor model. It's not going to look super flashy with the huge wheels. Those are all available options. And crucially, while it does have Autopilot, it does not have the full self-driving capabilities that people like to talk about when it comes to Tesla's Autopilot system. That's actually part of a $7,000 add-on option. So speaking of options, you have to be mindful when buying any sort of Tesla product because the price easily swells up. Now, if you go on Tesla's website and try to configure a Model 3 and you add every single option to it, you're looking at a $67,000 vehicle, which is suddenly a lot more cash than the Bolt. Is it a good vehicle? It certainly does seem like it, but be careful with those options. Next up is the Nissan Leaf. Now we're currently on the second generation of Leaf, which has a lot greater range than the original model did, but it is still quite a ways off what the Bolt can do, because depending on how you spec it, it's between 169 to 220 miles of range, which is obviously quite a bit less than this vehicle. Though the Leaf's also just a smaller, less expensive vehicle in general. However, I would argue that the price differential is close enough that the Bolt tends to make more sense to me personally. Now, next up you have the Kia Niro. And like I said, with EVs, you have to consider their general shape and size rather than the explicit segment that they're in, because while this is technically a tall hatchback, the Niro is technically a small crossover SUV. Irrespective of that, the base price is quite similar. I believe it's $37 grand off the top of my head, though it does have less range than the Bolt. It's 20 miles less exactly at 239 miles of range, though it does have the same 200 horsepower as the Bolt. However, the Kia is kind of like the Tesla, where because it's a slightly larger vehicle with slightly more options available, you have to be careful about the sticker creep, because it is entirely possible that you can end up buying a Niro with too many options and end up being a very expensive vehicle, much more so than the Bolt. So to me, it kind of seems like right now, if you have around $40,000 to spend, the Bolt's kind of at the front of the pack in terms of options and value and range and general usability. However, when it comes to buying a Bolt, I mentioned at the beginning of the video there's a little buying hack with this car. And don't worry, I'm going to let you know exactly what that is right now. Here's the buying hack behind the Chevrolet Bolt. The trick is to act fast. Chevy's updating the Bolt for 2021. Now, the new car is going to have the same basic battery and tech as this car, but it will have an updated interior and exterior, as well as introduce a new, more SUV-like model alongside this one. So, if you act fast, Chevy dealers are offering huge discounts on these cars. Now, GM's official number is $9,795, but locally, I found dealers offering up to $13,000 off the price of this car. Now, I have found base model Bolts for under $26,000, and I found fully loaded cars with every single option, just like this one, for $31 grand, which is an unbeatable deal. So, the Chevrolet Bolt in a nutshell. It's handsome, well-equipped, has more range than the competition, and at these prices, it's truly unbeatable in the segment. That's all I've got for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you have not already, please do subscribe. It helps me out a lot. And I'll see you guys next time where I go do more fun things with cars. Bye.